Okie dokie. Let me read to you from Philippians chapter 2 as we continue our journey through this amazing book and we consider joy, discovering joy. So, Philippians chapter 2 verse 12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it's God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. Do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault, in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe, as you hold out the word of life, in order that I may boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor for nothing. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. So, like I say, we're continuing our journey through the letter that Paul wrote to the church in Philippi. If you remember, it was a church that in the 60s AD, that particular decade and onwards, was suffering a lot of persecution under the Roman Emperor Nero. It was proving to be more and more costly to be a Christian. And Paul was writing to them from a prison in Rome, and yet he was under house arrest in Rome, I should say, but yet every part of this letter is about joy, the benefit of it, the need to have it, the decision to rejoice, and so on. It's all about joy. Now, we've looked at three situations in which it's really beneficial to have a joyful attitude. The joy, discovering the joy of finding the positive in our situation, and the positive in others, and letting go of pride. All of those three areas are made possible by a fourth area of joy. You have to have this area of joy in place if you want the other areas of joy to be a reality. We should have started with this, but you can slot this in and make everything else unlock. It's the joy of having clean hands and pure hearts. Discovering that joy, clean hands and pure hearts. To put that another way, it's about having a clear conscience. Having no guilty secrets, which lead us to feel the need to cover up the truth, which, spoiler alert, we all have. Now, the Apostle John once said in 1 John chapter 3, verse 21, "Dear friends, if our conscience is clear, we can come to God with bold confidence." Now, what I've found in my own personal journey of faith is that I really don't want to be the pride-filled person that we were looking at last week. So the problem for me in coming to God with bold confidence is that it sounds a lot like coming with quite a bit of pride. Oh, God, it's me again, you lucky, lucky God. Here I am. Yes, I'm spending some of my valuable time with you. And I've always had, personally, far too much to confess to God when I come to him to have that kind of attitude. And you think about a story that Jesus told about two men who went to the temple to pray. And one of the men was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector, a dishonest tax collector, I have to say. Well, the story is picked up. The proud Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer: "I thank you, God, that I'm not a sinner like everyone else, especially that tax collector over there. Don't stare, God, you know. For I never cheat. I don't sin. I don't commit adultery. I fast twice a week, and I give you 1/10 of my income. But the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me. I am a sinner." And Jesus finished the story by saying, "I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For the proud will be humbled, and the humble will be honored." Now, how does that story fit in with the idea of coming to God with bold confidence? Well, the way it fits in, of course, is that the Pharisee, along with many Christians, was laboring under a counterfeit of what bold confidence really is. The counterfeit is self-assurance or pride, whereas the real thing comes out of a genuinely clear conscience. If our conscience is clear, we can come to God with bold confidence. Now, the Bible describes that clear conscience in the following way. It says, "Who may go up on the mountain of the Lord?" That is to say, to be in a close, intimate relationship with him. "Who may stand in his holy temple?" Only those with clean hands and pure hearts, who have not worshipped idols, who have not made promises in the name of a false god. With those clean hands and that pure heart, or those with those clean hands and that pure heart, are able to experience a relationship with Jesus Christ that is marked by bold confidence. And as Paul goes on to explore in this next section of his letter to the Philippian church, having clean hands and a pure heart also ensures a level of joy in the Christian life that is denied to those who are either convinced of their own greatness or who think that to get on in life they need to keep God at arm's length. So why is it such a joy to have clean hands and a pure heart, or even to aspire to that? And how do we develop those things? Well, it's such a joy, firstly, because it strengthens our relationship with God. This is an obvious place to start. It strengthens our relationship with God. Sounds too obvious for me to even mention here, but it's worth mentioning because the truth is there's a lot of confusion in the Christian world regarding what actually strengthens our relationship with God. See, for a lot of people, it's down to how much time they spend with God. If I can spend hours in prayer and read chapters of the Bible each day, I'm bound to be growing in my relationship with God. If I learn more theological stuff, if I study more, then my relationship with God will be deeper. If I serve more, give more, sacrifice more, surely that's got to count. You'd think that would all be true. And of course, none of those are things that are wrong. In fact, all of those things can be very good indeed. But the fact remains that if our hearts do not make us feel guilty, we can come without fear into God's presence. It's having a heart that is free from guilt, a pure heart that provides the right motivation that makes all of those other things count. Doing things out of a sense of compulsion or ought, on the other hand, renders those things ineffective. You can give your body to the flames, but if you have not love, if your heart isn't right, you might as well not bother. God says to Samuel the prophet, they, the people, look at the outward appearance I look at the heart. God looks at the attitude out of which our actions come and blesses the heart attitude rather than the outward actions. He looks for a pure heart, literally an undivided heart, a heart of integrity. And flowing out from that pure heart, he looks for clean hands, fruitful activity that comes from a heart of integrity. Integrity coming from the word integer, meaning whole number, not a fraction, but a whole heart, a wholehearted desire to serve God. And he draws close to those people. Now that's the clear message of the Bible. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Those are not two separate thoughts. Draw near to God. Yes, but how? Well, cleanse your hands, purify your hearts. That's how. See, a double-minded person is someone who lacks integrity, who's not wholehearted. Only those with clean hands and a purified heart can draw close to God. Others will be ever so busy for the Lord without ever experiencing his tender-heartedness. Just like the elder son in the parable of the prodigal son. And coming out of that, the second reason why it is such a joy to have clean hands and a pure heart is because it strengthens our spiritual walk. Now, what I mean by that is that our relationship with God is the inner reality of our Christian life, whereas our spiritual walk is the outworking of that inner reality. It's what we experience on a day-by-day basis. As the book of Job puts it, nevertheless, the righteous shall hold to his way, and he who has clean hands shall grow stronger and stronger. To grow in strength in our Christian life is fundamentally about having clean hands, acting in our Christian lives out of a clear conscience. Point is, we can learn more and more stuff. And let us be honest, I'm hoping we already know quite a lot of stuff because I've been preaching in this church for 26 years, probably more than that. So hopefully by now we know stuff. And the truth be told, we all know far more than we actually do. Far more. We can go into deeper and deeper truths. But if our hearts aren't pure within us and our hands aren't clean, if there is unresolved sin in our lives or attitudes that aren't right, then it doesn't matter how much we're learning or how much we're serving. We're not going to be growing in our relationship with God. And we're not going to be experiencing a strengthening of our spiritual lives. Now, honestly, the heart of my preaching, certainly I'm sure Ollie would say the same, is not just to impart more knowledge. In certain circumstances, like, for instance, 1 Corinthians 1 verse 8 says, knowledge puffs up. The heart of my preaching is to encourage clean hands and a pure heart, a right heart attitude, and sacrificial ministry as a result. That's what draws us closer into God's presence. See, the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayers of the righteous. That's where true joy lies. So how do we develop clean hands and a pure heart? That's what Paul focuses on now in this next installment of his letter to the Philippians. If you wonder where all this was going, it's right here. He says that, look, we need to understand the connection between the two, clean hands, pure heart. If we misunderstand the connection, we fall into one of two camps. Either we're so heavenly minded that we're of no earthly use, or we slide into salvation by works. I'll just carry on doing stuff, assuming that that must count with God somehow. The right heart and the right hands have to go together. And Paul puts it this way: dearest friends, you were always so careful to follow my instruction when I was with you. And now that I'm away, you must be even more careful to put into action, that is, have clean hands, God's saving work in your lives, obeying God with deep reverence and fear, that is, a pure heart. Clean hands and a pure heart. In fact, according to the Bible, if we know what we should be doing and we don't do it, we're actually sinning. So that's the message of James chapter 4, verse 17. Remember, it is sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. Joy doesn't come from more knowledge. It comes from putting what we know into practice and seeing the results. You can know that the gospel is still powerful and able to save and change people's lives, but the joy is in actually sharing your faith with someone and seeing it begin to happen. You can know that putting on a holiday club would probably attract lots of unchurched children, but the joy is actually doing it, getting involved and seeing lives changed. We've got a young person, one of the young people in our church in Westgate, who, for the first time today, took a copy of one of my books, one of my many books. There was the, oh, never mind. And because she's really convicted to want to read this. Her life is actually in the actual real process of changing right before our eyes. She is changing as a person week by week. Finally, she's picked up a book. She's taken it away to read it. Now, you can know that, but you don't feel the joy that I feel seeing it happening, seeing her taking the book away, knowing that she's going to read my latest book called, thank you, Pastor, called My Child. That's right. And knowing that there's going to be something in there that's going to further change her life. That's joy. We need to have both a pure heart and clean hands. Faith without works is dead. If the Lord is speaking to you in your heart about something, that's exciting. But to convert that into joy, you need to have clean hands too. You need to actually do something about it. Not in a half-hearted, careless way, but like Paul says, carefully, like it really matters, wholeheartedly. We develop clean hands and a pure heart by understanding the link between the two, but also by understanding the distinction between, and this is increasingly crucial, the distinction between being in the world but not of it. See, to have clean hands is about getting involved in the world, in the local community, where we work or wherever. To do it with a pure heart is about the way we get involved. Now, Paul puts it this way to the Philippians. He says, in everything you do, stay away from complaining and arguing, so that no one can speak a word of blame against you. You're to live clean, innocent lives as children of God in a dark world full of crooked and perverse people. Let your light shine brightly before them. This is about credibility. It's not about being squeaky clean or trying to present a perfect image. It's about being credible. And there is a huge credibility gap in the church. Largely because the church is more often of the world than in it. We've come apart and been separate and recreated the world behind our barricades. What does it mean to be credible? 3 things. It means being shrewd, it means being straightforward, and it means being see-through. In everything you do, stay away from complaining and arguing so that no one can speak a word of blame against you. It's about being shrewd in terms of which conversations we get involved in. You know, there's a lot of wisdom about just walking away. Walk away. Have you heard voices drop to a conspiratorial mutter? Walk away. Be shrewd about this. It's a lot easier to excuse ourselves from a conversation before it becomes compromising than it is to rescue ourselves from the compromise afterwards. Honest. I speak as one who knows. To be shrewd is to be alert to the warning signs. Like I say, the lowered voices, the checking to see if the person we're talking about is around. When do we need to be on our guard about not getting involved? Always be careful, it says. You know, Lord, I want to be a credible witness, so keep me awake and alert to compromising situations and steer me clear of them. Lead me not into temptation. To be straightforward, that's to be shrewd. To be straightforward is about living clean, innocent lives as children of God. It's about us letting our yes be yes and our no be no. Can you be both shrewd and straightforward at the same time? Absolutely. Shrewdness is about choosing what you're going to get involved in. And straightforwardness is about maintaining consistent, clear, positive boundaries. People might not agree with those decisions or standards, but at least they can see that you stick to them and they can see them in action. Be consistent. I've started that sentence, so I'll finish. I've said to Jan so many times, when people say to you, what do you think? Ask them, do you want my honest opinion or do you just want to feel better? Just ask them first before you give them your honest opinion. Give them the option of checking out. But actually, she's quite right. Just be honest. I've stopped asking you. No, I haven't. This is what builds credibility. Being shrewd, being straightforward, and also being see-through. Being see-through is about allowing people appropriate access to your life. Let your lives shine brightly before them. One of the things about walking in the light is that the light illuminates our lives. We're called by God to live without a shadow side to our lives, which we all have to a certain degree, but actually our journey in life is to be eliminating the shadow side. Again, this is not about being perfect. It's about being honest. It's not being inappropriately open, but adopting a policy of honesty rather than covering up. The distinction between being in the world but not of it comes down to the issue of credibility, which is about shrewdness, straightforwardness, and see-throughness. but we also develop clean hands and a pure heart, and therefore experience a life or a lot of joy in our lives by understanding the difference between what we are to hold tightly to and what we are to hold loosely to. What do you hold on to tightly? What do you hold on to loosely? Now, honestly, this is one of the major struggles that Christians have. We tend to hold tightly to what we should be holding loosely to, and vice versa. I don't know how many twos there should have been in that. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. Christians so often hold tightly to things like status and recognition and worldly security and the trappings of this world. We get so caught up in spinning all these plates. And it's not that they're not important. It's just that they're not where true joy lies. Paul says to the Philippian church, hold tightly to the word of life. You want to hold tightly to something? Hold tightly to the word. True joy and true freedom comes from holding tightly to the right things. In fact, as Jesus once said to Martha, there's really only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary's discovered it. I'm not going to take it away from her. Now, Paul was writing to a group of Christians who were systematically having everything stripped away from them. Their security, their status, the very things that in former years they would have taken for granted. And Paul says that's only going to really shake you if you're holding on tightly to those things. You need to hold tightly to that which cannot be taken away. And that is going to, and hold on tightly to what's going to last for eternity. The rest of it, we need to hold loosely to. And Paul included even his life in that latter category. He was on death row and had been for a couple of years, and in fact was destined to be on death row for another 5 or 6 years after writing this letter, before he's finally convicted and beheaded, as tradition has it. In that time, he had very few privileges, he had no freedom, he had no power to mold his own future. So he learned to hold loosely to those things. He says, but even if I am to die for you, I will rejoice. And I want to share my joy with all of you. How can he say that? Well, joy for Paul came from holding loosely to the things that he had no power over anyway. And holding tightly to the right thing, the word of life. And that's what led Paul to develop clean hands and a pure heart. And that led him to be in a position to have genuine joy to share with others, whatever the circumstances. See, for Paul, even with the threat to his life hanging over him, he still got joy enough to share. Why? Well, fundamentally because he had clean hands and a pure heart. He was fully engaged in doing ministry, but his heart was fully devoted to developing and maintaining a right relationship with Jesus Christ. And everything else he held loosely. The more things we have in life, the harder it is to hold loosely to them. We get so confused in this area, so caught up with holding tightly to the wrong things, with so many things competing for our attention. I think there's never been such an urgent need to prioritize in life as there is today, because we've never had so many things. We so need to experience the joy of having clean hands and a pure heart once more. In the midst of all the complicated busyness and uncertainties, what Paul sets before us is the opportunity to experience the joy of focused lives. Lives that are shrewd, lives that are straightforward, lives that are see-through. Lives where, if you freeze frame them at any particular moment, you're the same person in that moment as you are in any other moment. Not perfect by any means, but not compartmentalized either. Do you know, I think we need to pray right now and ask God for that to be a reality in our lives. Clean hands and a pure heart. That's what I so want in my life. A whole lot more than what I've got right now. I know it's what I want for all of us here, all of us listening. Lord Jesus, this is your offer, that you would cleanse us, that you would make us clean-hearted, pure-hearted. And out of that we would have clean hands, not compromised and mired in sin and double standards and double dealing and holding tightly to the wrong things, but clean hands that come from a pure heart, where we are living lives where we are shrewd about what we're getting involved in and what we're not getting involved in, where we are straightforward, letting our yes be yes and our no be no. Where we are see-through, not pretending to be perfect, but just being what you see is what you get. And the joy that comes from that, I guess, is a freedom from the fear of what would they say if they found out. The joy of knowing we have short accounts with you. The joy of knowing that Satan has no hold over us. Lord, would you give us, would you release to us clean hands and pure hearts, that we may serve you with joy, with freedom, with lightness, with honesty. Lord, that I would love, and I long for that in my life, and I long for that in all of our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.